You are sitting in the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Bf 109, and the sky around you is not sky at all, but a canvas of tracer fire and smoke, a hellscape painted in streaks of orange and white against the pale blue of the Eastern Front. The year is 1943, and you are 21 years old, though your hands on the control stick belong to someone much older, someone who has seen things that age a man faster than time ever could. Your name is Eric Hartman, and in this moment, as you bank hard to the left and feel the G-forces pressing your body into the seat like a giant's palm, you do not yet know that history will call you the greatest fighter ace who ever lived. The aircraft shudders, a metal bird screaming through air so thin and cold that your breath fogs the inside of your oxygen mask. Below you, the Russian steppe stretches endlessly, a flat brown wasteland marked only by the black scars of tank treads and the tiny geometries of villages that may or may not still contain living souls. The engine roars, a Daimler-Benz DB605 that sounds like controlled fury, like 1,000 hammers striking steel in perfect rhythm, and you can feel its vibration in your teeth, in your spine, in the very core of your being. Ahead, 300 meters and closing, a Soviet Yak-9 fighter weaves through the clouds like a desperate moth. You do not hate the pilot inside that machine. You cannot afford hate, cannot afford anything except the cold mathematics of deflection angles and bullet trajectories. Your instructor once told you that dogfighting is not about aggression, but about patience, about waiting for the single perfect moment when geometry and fate align. You wait now, your finger resting lightly on the trigger, your eyes tracking the enemy's movement with a focus so intense that the rest of the world, the war, the Reich, the future that waits like a coiled snake, fades into nothing. 200 meters, the Yak banks right, a maneuver you anticipated 3 seconds before it happened, because you have done this dance 207 times before, because you have learned to read the sky the way a priest reads scripture. You adjust your angle, a minute correction of the stick, a gentle pressure of your left foot on the rudder pedal. The distance closes, 150 meters, and now you can see the rivets on the enemy's fuselage, can imagine the face of the man inside, young like you, terrified like you, human like you. 100 meters, and you squeeze the trigger. The MG-131 machine guns mounted in the cowling erupt, a sound like the world tearing in half, and the recoil shakes the entire aircraft. You watch because you must always watch, must confirm, must witness as your bullets find their target, stitching a line across the Yak's wing route. Metal peels away like paper, smoke blooms black and angry, and the Soviet fighter begins its descent, spiraling downward in that terrible ballet you have seen too many times to count.
You do not celebrate. There is no time, no room in your heart for anything except the next threat, the next target, the next desperate attempt to survive another minute in a sky that wants you dead. This is kill number 208, though you do not know that historians will eventually credit you with 352 confirmed aerial victories, a record that will stand unbroken for decades, perhaps forever. You know only that the radio in your ear is crackling with German voices, calling out positions and warnings, that your fuel gauge shows you have perhaps 20 minutes of flight time remaining, that somewhere far below men are dying in mud and snow for reasons that seemed clear once, but now feel as distant as childhood. The sky here is not like the sky over Bavaria, where you learned to fly, where clouds were soft things and the sun was warm. Here, the sky is an abattoir, a slaughterhouse painted blue.
You pull back on the stick, climbing now, gaining altitude where the air is thinner and the Soviet fighters struggle to follow, their engines gasping like drowning men. The altimeter needle swings past 4,000 meters, 5,000, and up here, the cold penetrates even the fur-lined leather of your flight suit, seeping into your bones with the patience of something that knows it will win eventually. Your squadron leader's voice crackles through the headset, clipped, efficient, telling you that another wave is approaching from the northeast. 12 contacts, maybe 15. The numbers blur together after a while, because what difference does it make whether death comes in 10s or 20s? You've been flying for 4 hours today. This is your third sortie, and there will be a fourth before the sun sets behind the Caucasus Mountains, like a blood orange sinking into dark water. Your body aches, not from injury, but from the constant tension, the endless vigilance required to stay alive in a machine that wants to kill you almost as much as the enemy does. The Bf-109 is a beautiful aircraft, sleek and deadly and utterly unforgiving of mistakes. It will snap into a spin if you mishandle it, will stall without warning if you push the angle of attack too far, will remind you with every flight that you are a guest in the sky, not a master. Below, the war continues its grinding machinery. Stalingrad has fallen. The Wehrmacht is retreating across 1,000 kilometers of frozen hell, and men are dying at a rate that makes the accountants in Berlin weep into their ledgers. But up here in the thin blue silence between earth and heaven, the war is simpler, cleaner, reduced to the pure equation of hunter and hunted. You are good at this equation, perhaps the best who has ever lived, though you would never say such a thing aloud, because the pilots who brag are usually the ones whose names end up on the casualty lists. Your tactics are not the aggressive slashing attacks favored by some aces. You do not dive into the middle of enemy formations like a madman seeking glory. Instead, you watch, you circle, you wait for the straggler, the damaged aircraft limping home, the pilot whose attention has wandered for just a moment. You strike from the sun when possible, a shadow materializing into death before your victim even knows you are there. See and not be seen, your instructor taught you, and you have made this philosophy your religion, your art, your reason for still being alive when so many of your comrades are scattered across the Russian steppe like discarded toys. The new contacts appear now, tiny specks against the clouds that grow larger with each second. You count them, 14 Soviet fighters, probably Il-2 Sturmoviks, the aircraft the Russians call the flying tank because they are armored like medieval knights and nearly as difficult to kill. Your wingman, a 19-year-old named Wilhelm, who still has acne on his cheeks, pulls into formation beside you. You can see his face through the canopy, pale and tight with fear that he tries to hide behind a mask of professionalism. He has 7 kills, respectable for someone who has been at the front for only 3 months. But you remember when you had 7 kills. Remember the arrogance you felt, the certainty that you were invincible.
That certainty died somewhere over Rostov when you watched your best friend's aircraft explode in midair. One moment a machine, the next moment orange flowers blooming in the sky and pieces of metal tumbling toward earth like autumn leaves. You do not feel invincible anymore. You feel lucky, and you know that luck is a finite resource that you spend a little of with every mission, every engagement, every moment you remain alive when the statistics say you should be dead. You radio Wilhelm, your voice calm, almost gentle, telling him to stay high, to cover your approach, to not do anything heroic, because heroes die quickly and are forgotten even faster. He acknowledges, his voice cracking slightly, and you feel a pang of something that might be tenderness, or might be exhaustion, or might simply be the recognition that you are leading a child into slaughter and calling it duty. The engagement begins not with drama, but with the quiet compression of time that happens when violence becomes inevitable. You select your target, an IL-2 at the edge of the formation, slightly lower than the others, and you begin your approach from above and behind, using the sun as your cloak, even though the winter sun here is weak and pale, like something dying. The distance closes, 800 meters, 700, and your heart does not race anymore, because your body has learned that panic is a luxury you cannot afford, that survival requires a coldness that would frighten you if you allowed yourself to think about it. 600 meters, and the IL-2 pilot still hasn't seen you, hasn't sensed the predator descending upon him like a falcon upon a dove. You can see the rear gunner now, a man hunched behind his weapon, scanning the sky in every direction except the one that matters. 500 meters, you adjust for deflection, for the wind that buffets your aircraft, for the relative speeds and angles that your mind calculates without conscious thought anymore, the way a pianist's fingers find keys in the dark. 400 meters, and you fire. The cannons mounted in your wings erupt, 20-millimeter shells streaking through the frozen air at nearly a kilometer per second, and you watch them converge on the IL-2's engine cowling. Sparks fly, metal fragments spin away, and black smoke begins to pour from the Soviet aircraft like blood from a mortal wound. The IL-2 shudders, drops its nose, begins the long fall toward the earth, 8,000 meters below. You do not watch it all the way down. You cannot, because the rest of the formation has seen you now, has turned toward you like a school of fish reacting to a shark, and suddenly the sky is full of tracer fire that looks beautiful and deadly, like lightning frozen in time.
You brake hard right, the G-forces crushing you into your seat, your vision narrowing to a tunnel, gray creeping in at the edges as your blood struggles to reach your brain. The BF-109 screams in protest, metal groaning, rivets straining, but it holds together because German engineering is one of the few things in this war that hasn't betrayed you yet. A line of tracers passes through the space where you were 2 seconds ago, so close you can hear them, a sound like angry hornets, and you understand that death missed you by the width of a breath. Wilhelm's voice in your headset, high and frantic, shouting that there are 2 on his tail, that he can't shake them, that he needs help. You scan the sky, find him 2 kilometers away, twisting and diving with 2 Yak-9s pursuing him like wolves running down a deer. The mathematics are simple and terrible. You can reach him in perhaps 40 seconds, but in 40 seconds he will likely be dead, his aircraft spinning toward Earth in pieces, his last thoughts of his mother in Hamburg, or a girl whose name you've heard him whisper in his sleep. You turn toward him anyway, because this is what you do, what you have always done, even though the rational part of your mind is screaming that you are about to fly into a hornet's nest, that you are trading a certain survival for a probable death. Your throttle is already at maximum, the engine howling like something possessed, and you dive now, trading altitude for speed, the airspeed indicator climbing past 600 kilometers per hour until the whole aircraft vibrates like a tuning fork. 30 seconds. Wilhelm's aircraft is smoking, hit in the wing, pieces of fabric tearing away and streaming behind him like funeral ribbons. The two yaks are closing for the kill. You can see their cannon fire, bright flashes from their nose-mounted weapons, and you know that if you don't reach him in the next 10 seconds, there will be nothing left to save. Your world narrows to this, to speed and angle and distance, to the cold calculus of interception, to the hope that you are still faster, still better, still luckier than the universe's desire to kill you both. 15 seconds, and you are close enough now to fire.
You squeeze the trigger, not in desperation, but with the cold precision that has kept you alive through 209 previous kills, and your cannon shells arc through the sky like meteors summoned from some ancient and terrible heaven. The trailing Yak-9, the one closest to Wilhelm, the one whose pilot has already tasted victory in his imagination, takes your rounds along its fuselage in a diagonal line that stitches from tail to cockpit. The canopy explodes outward, glass and metal, and possibly pieces of the pilot himself scattering into the slipstream, and the aircraft rolls inverted and begins its descent, a death spiral that you've seen so many times it has become almost mundane, almost boring, except that it never truly is, because each one represents a human life extinguished like a candle in wind. The second yak breaks off, its pilot wiser or more cautious or simply luckier in his survival instincts. And Wilhelm manages to level his aircraft, though smoke still pours from his wing root, and you can see daylight through holes in his fuselage that shouldn't be there. His voice crackles through the radio, shaking, barely coherent, thanking you in a stream of words that blur together into a single prayer of gratitude. You tell him to head for base, your voice still calm, still steady, though your hands are trembling now from adrenaline or exhaustion, or the delayed recognition of how close you both came to joining the statistics. But you cannot escort him, cannot protect him on his journey home, because the sky around you is still full of Soviet aircraft, and your fuel gauge is showing yellow, and you have perhaps 10 minutes of ammunition remaining. You climb again, always climbing, always seeking the advantage of height, and you engage 2 more targets in the next 12 minutes. One you damage, watching it limp away, trailing smoke, but still flying, still defying gravity and your best efforts. The other you destroy, a clean kill, your shells punching through the cockpit and ending the pilot's war in an instant that was probably merciful compared to burning or freezing or drowning in the sky. That makes 211 confirmed kills, though the number means less to you than the weight of your body in the seat, the ache in your neck from constantly scanning the sky, the way your mouth tastes of copper and fear, and the recycled air of your oxygen mask. You turn for home, your fuel now critical, your ammunition expended, and you descend through layers of cloud that are gray and heavy, like the conscience you try not to examine too closely. The landing is routine, wheels touching frozen earth at a Luftwaffe base whose name you can barely remember because you've operated from so many, each one identical in its collection of tents and crude buildings and men who look older than their years. You taxi to the dispersal area, engine coughing and sputtering on the last drops of fuel, and when you finally shut down and climb from the cockpit, your legs nearly buckle because you've been sitting for 6 hours and your body has forgotten how to stand. The ground crew swarms your aircraft, counting the bullet holes, assessing the damage, already calculating how many hours of work it will take to make it airworthy again. They find 17 holes in the wings and fuselage, some small, some large enough to put your fist through, and you marvel once more at the fact that you are alive, that metal and luck and perhaps something else conspired to bring you home when the sky wanted you so badly to stay. Wilhelm lands 10 minutes after you, his aircraft barely controllable, and when he climbs out, he vomits onto the frozen ground and then sits there in the snow, crying like the child he still is. You walk over, put your hand on his shoulder, say nothing, because there are no words adequate for what he's feeling, for what you both know he will feel every day for the rest of his life if he survives this war.
That night, you lie in your bunk, a narrow cot in a freezing barracks shared with 11 other fighter pilots, and you cannot sleep because your mind replays the day's engagements frame by frame, analyzing what you did right and what you did wrong and how you can be better tomorrow. Outside, the Russian winter howls, minus 30 degrees, and somewhere in the darkness, men are dying in ways that make aerial combat seem clean and honorable by comparison. You think about the future, though you try not to, because the future is a luxury fighter pilots cannot afford. The war ends on a spring day in 1945, not with glory, but with the slow collapse of everything you believed defined the world, and you surrender to American forces in Czechoslovakia with a sense of relief so profound it feels like a physical weight lifting from your chest. You have survived. 352 confirmed kills, 1,400 combat missions, more than you ever thought possible when you first climbed into a cockpit as a boy who dreamed of flying the way other boys dreamed of girls or gold. The Americans treat you well. They are curious about you, about the young man who became death in the sky, and for a few weeks you allow yourself to believe that the nightmare is over, that you will go home to your wife, Ursula, that you will build a life in a Germany that must somehow rise from the ashes of its own madness. But then the Americans hand you over to the Soviets, and the nightmare does not end, but transforms into something slower, colder, more deliberate in its cruelty. You are transported east, back across the lands you once flew over as a hunter, except now you are cargo, property, a war criminal in the eyes of men who lost brothers and fathers and sons to pilots like you. The train journey takes weeks, cattle cars packed with German prisoners, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and despair, and you stare through the gaps in the wooden slats at the Russian landscape rolling past and understand that you are descending into a different kind of hell. The prison is in the Urals, a labor camp whose name you will never learn because it exists only as a number in Soviet records, and here you will spend the next 10 years of your life. Not 10 months, not 10 weeks, 10 years. 3,660 days of waking before dawn to work in coal mines where the air is so thick with dust that breathing becomes a form of slow suicide, where men die from exhaustion or cold or simply from the accumulated weight of hopelessness pressing down on their souls like stones. You are interrogated, endlessly, methodically, by men who want you to confess to war crimes you did not commit, who beat you when you refuse, who deny you food and sleep and human dignity in an attempt to break you the way you once broke Soviet formations in the sky. They call you a murderer, and you cannot argue because you did kill. 352 times you killed, though you killed in war, in combat, by rules that seemed to matter once, but feel increasingly like comfortable lies you told yourself to sleep at night. Your fellow prisoners are a catalogue of the damned, Wehrmacht soldiers and SS officers and civilians who were simply in the wrong place when the borders shifted and nations redrew themselves in blood. Some of them die quickly, the weak, the sick, the ones who cannot adapt to a world where a crust of bread is wealth beyond measure. Others survive through methods you try not to examine too closely, through theft or collaboration, or by becoming the kind of person they would have despised before the war taught them that principles are luxuries afforded only to the well-fed. You survive through stubbornness, through a core of will that perhaps was forged in those 1,400 missions when death was always one mistake away. You survive by making yourself useful, teaching mathematics to the camp commandant's son, repairing machinery with hands that once guided a fighter through aerial ballet, finding small ways to be valuable enough to keep alive, but not so valuable that your captors see you as a threat. You survive by remembering Ursula, her face, her voice, the way she smelled of lavender and summer, even in the depths of winter, and you make her a promise across the vast distance that separates you, that you will come home, that you will not let this place consume you the way it has consumed so many others. The years blur together, one winter indistinguishable from the next, one day of hard labor bleeding into another until time itself becomes meaningless. You grow older here, not just in years, but in the way that suffering ages a man, carving lines into his face and bending his back and filling his eyes with a weariness that sleep cannot cure. You watch men go mad, screaming in the night, attacking guards in suicide charges, or simply sitting down in the snow one day and refusing to move until the cold takes them gently into whatever comes after. In 1955, 10 years after your surrender, Chancellor Adenauer negotiates your release as part of a prisoner exchange, and you board a train heading west with men who look like ghosts, hollow-eyed and gaunt, and wondering if the world they left still exists.
You cross back into Germany, a nation divided now, split between victors who cannot agree on anything except that the Germany you knew must never rise again. And you step onto a platform in Stuttgart, where Ursula is waiting. She is older, you both are. 10 years stolen by history's indifference to individual lives. But when she embraces you, it feels like coming home from a very long flight. You do not talk about the prison, not then, not for many years, because some experiences exist beyond language, beyond the ability of words to contain or explain. You rebuild your life, quietly, humbly, working as a flight instructor, because flying is the only thing you know, the only skill the war taught you that has value in peace. And sometimes, late at night, when sleep will not come, you stand outside and look up at the stars and remember what it felt like to live in the sky, to be young and deadly and certain that you were fighting for something that mattered. You remember the faces of your wingmen, Wilhelm and so many others, most of them dead now, their names carved on memorials or forgotten entirely. You remember the sensation of the control stick in your hand, the roar of the engine, the terrible beauty of combat at 400 kilometers per hour. You remember, and you wonder if survival was victory or simply another form of defeat. And you understand, finally, that history will argue about you forever, that some will call you a hero and others a killer, and both will be right and both will be wrong. You are simply a man who flew and fought and survived when so many did not. And perhaps that is all any of us are in the end, survivors of our own stories, carrying the weight of our choices until the day we can finally set them down. The sky above Germany is peaceful now, empty of tracers and smoke, and you are grateful for that peace, even as you miss the clarity that war provided, the simple mathematics of survival that made every decision matter. You lived. That is your triumph and your burden. And in the quiet moments, you wonder if the 352 men you killed would understand, would forgive, would recognize that you were all just boys playing at war in a sky that belonged to none of you. This is what it means to survive, to carry ghosts, to remember.